Okay, hello everybody. Some breaking news here with President Joe Biden. He has just stepped down and endorses Kamala Harris here, the vice president, to finish the term. So Biden is no longer in the race for 2024 here. Not going to happen. He's dropped out. So who knows what's going to happen next, but that's what's going on. And here is some news footage to confirm that for you. Just in case you have any doubt. So thanks for watching, everybody. Subscribe and stay tuned, and I'll see you in the next video.
It is a stunning and historic development, but it is not altogether unexpected based on the reporting from NBC News. Remember that President Biden has struck a defiant tone ever since those calls began after his debate performance several weeks ago, widely panned as disastrous. You now have a number of House Democrats, and as of today, 3 senators who are suggesting that President Biden should, in fact, step off the ticket. And it appears as though he has, in fact, made that decision to do so. He says that he will speak to the nation later this week in more detail about his decision. He goes on to say that he expresses his deepest gratitude to all of those who have worked so hard to see him reelected. And importantly, he goes on to thank Vice President Kamala Harris for being an extraordinary partner in all this work. Again, thanking the American people for the faith and trust that they have placed in him. So a couple of questions answered here and a couple of questions still ahead. First of all, there was a question that if President Biden stepped off the ticket, would he also, in fact, resign from the presidency? He is making clear in this letter that he will not do that. But there's a big question remaining, which is, what happens next? What happens next now to the Democratic ticket? There had been some calls, some questions for example, an open mini primary, perhaps, before the convention that is set to happen next month in Chicago. There had also been a question of whether Kamala Harris should now take the top of the ticket. She is the one who would inherit, essentially, the infrastructure, the campaign money, the campaign cash, the war chest that the Biden-Harris ticket has accumulated. Keep in mind, again, this is a stunning turnaround considering the president has promised time and time again to stay in this race, even struggling, of course, to face off against Mr. Trump during that first presidential debate. So we are working to get our reporters up and ready to go here because, again, a significant development in this presidential race. The president goes on to say in this letter, I believe today what I always have, that there is nothing America can't do when we do it together. We just have to remember we are the United States of America. As for the other side of the ticket, we are out now to the Trump campaign for their response. And over the course of the last several weeks, there has been a notable shift in the way that Republicans and the Trump team have responded to the possibility that President Biden could, in fact, come off the ticket. Initially, it was to cast President Biden as the only one, as the inevitable candidate for the Democrats here. But over the course of maybe the last week or so, there has been a notable difference in tone where Republicans are now suggesting that whoever is at the top of the Democratic ticket, they intend to essentially lash the Biden agenda to that person, whether it is Vice President Kamala Harris or whether it is somebody else, in fact. So again, just to reset here for a second, significant news here as President Biden says he will step out of this race. Ali Rafa is live for us at the White House now. Ali, I want to turn to you. She's at Rehoboth because that is where President Biden has been convalescing, recovering from COVID, essentially, Ali.
That's right, Hallie, and this was no doubt the most difficult decision of the president's 5-decade-long political career, and he no doubt had plenty of time to think about it over the past few days as he continued recovering from that COVID-19 diagnosis since Wednesday here at his Rehoboth Beach, Delaware home. And remember, this isn't coming as too much of a shock considering what we knew to be happening privately within Biden's inner circle. We knew that there were more reality-based conversations that the president was having with those closest to him, even with his own family members, according to sources familiar with the Biden family's conversations. They were considering factors like how, if he were to step down, what that replacement would look like, what that process would look like, how he would leave the party and the country in the most stable position as possible, specifically in the party's case, in as best a position as possible to defeat former President Trump in November. But of course, this is coming as somewhat of a shock considering how defiant we have seen the president and his campaign be in recent days. As recently as yesterday, they were talking about fundraisers that the president would continue planning to host at the end of the month. One of them with David Letterman in Massachusetts, another in Chicago around the Democratic National Convention. And of course, the president has said that the only things that would make him reconsider staying in this race would be the Lord Almighty or a medical condition. But again, we know that the conversations he was having in recent days were were more reality-based, more around the polling and the evidence showing that he was not able to defeat former President Trump in a head-to-head matchup in November. And as you mentioned, Hallie, the question really now is what happens next? Where does this all go next? Notably absent from this letter from the president announcing he was stepping down from this race is an official full-throated endorsement of his vice president, Kamala Harris. And there is even disagreement within the Democratic Party over whether she would be the best person to replace him at the top of the Democratic ticket. You're seeing some Democrats come out and support her, but also some Democrats come out and support sort of a mini open primary where any Democrat could throw their hat in the ring, a potentially very messy process. And so the president in this letter says he will speak to the nation later this week. Presumably we could hear from him as far as what happens next and who he plans to support in that address that he plans to deliver later this week. But of course, all of this putting more of a spotlight on this already extremely tight timeline that the Democrats have to rally around their replacement, their nominee. We have the delegates planning to vote in a virtual roll call the first week of August. And of course, in mid-August is the Democrats' National Convention. So all of this really putting a spotlight on that tight timeline. And all of this really began with that poor debate performance from President Biden on June 27th against former President Trump. And that's where we saw really the floodgates open with more and more Democratic lawmakers coming out and calling for the president to pass the torch to Vice President Kamala Harris or other Democrats who may be interested in throwing their hat in the ring. Hallie.
The other piece of this, Allie, it wasn't simply elected members of Congress who had been frustrated, more than 30 of them suggesting that President Biden should step aside. They had been concerned about not only the prospects for the White House come November, but also those key down-ballot races, control of the Senate and control of the House. It was also, however, donors, with NBC News reporting concerns that money was beginning to dry up going to the Biden campaign until and unless the president were to take the very step that he has taken now in just the last 10 minutes or so. Talk us through that piece of it, the building pressure on this campaign for the president to do exactly what he is now announcing today that he will do, and that is withdraw from the 2024 ticket.